Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first day of our business session out here with the India Central Asia Foundation, our seminar on understanding Central Asian perspectives on Eurasia. And with any further ado, Ambassador Fabian, please.
Thank you, dear friend Sandeep, for that brief intervention. That has, you make a specialty of it. Dobre utre, dame gospoda. Namaste, suprabhat. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We had a splendid inauguration yesterday, and it was a feast for the mind and the body. On the lawns, I made many new friends, and one of them told me that he has come back to India after 30 years studying here. 30 years ago, he was studying here, and he was so happy to be visiting his alma mater and his friends and making new friends. Now, these human connections are important. And thank you, Professor Nirmala Joshi and the India Central Asia Foundation for bringing all of us together, online, offline. Now, the last page of this excellent document tells us more about the foundation, and we have no doubt that this present conference will go a long way in deepening and strengthening India's relations with Central Asia. In many ways. Now, our theme is Eurasia in the mirror of Central Asia. Yesterday, Professor Nirmala Joshi and Admiral Sinha reminded us of the importance of the big picture. Now, in that context, we should take note of the recently concluded China-brokered rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, why China? My view, subject to correction, is that both Iran and Saudi Arabia had their own good reasons to bury the hatchet, but both also decided to do it under a Chinese umbrella. In plain English, they wanted to please China. Now, this, of course, signals an important increase in China's clout. Now, what might be the implications? Well, what will happen to the North-South transport corridor? It is possible, it is likely that China might take interest in that, and there can be a certain arrangement between the North-South transport corridor project and the Belt and Road. Or is it Road and Belt? Subject to correction, as always. Now, China has plans to invest $400 billion over a period in Iran energy sector. So we also note that relations between China and Russia have been getting stronger and deeper. Now, we do not know what might happen to JCPOA, Joint Common Plan of Action, that is the nuclear deal with Iran. It seems the Europeans want it. It seems Washington is in 2 minds, or maybe in 3 minds, anyway. Now, suppose it doesn't get revived, then it is possible that Iran might have to economically get closer and closer to Russia and China. And you can look at the map and see the geopolitical implications. Now, we are fortunate to have an excellent panel to tell us more about all these things. To my right is Professor Alexander Lukin. There is Professor's CV here, so I won't sort of take time to read it, but I did take note of the fact that his book, Russia, A Thorny Transition from Communism, that was published by which Books, India, in 2019. And then to my left is Professor Saltanat Yakubeva. Well, there is also a, biodata, and she is Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Oriental Studies for Scientific Innovations and International Relations of Oriental Studies, Al-Farabi Kazakh National University, Kazakhstan, Almaty. And we were supposed to have Professor Hashvi Pant, but he has regretted for unavoidable reasons at the last moment. So we will miss him, but we were keenly looking forward to having him. And we also have Sri Dipanjan Roy Chowdhury, diplomatic editor, The Economic Times. And I should say that, I do mock interviews for the civil service candidates who have been invited for the by the UPSC, and I tell them to read you if they want to do well in the interview, because contemporary matters, this is the best way to find out. Now, the best part of any such gathering is, of course, the Q&A. So, the distinguished scholars have agreed to speak for about 15 minutes, and then we will have Q&A. So, let us now request Professor Alexander Lukin.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I'm a bit puzzled for having been asked to speak at this conference at all, because it's basically about Central Asian views of great powers, and I don't belong to Central Asia. I was born and lived in Europe. Even in Russia, I lived all my life in the European part. Of course, to speak the first, it's a great honor for me, but I would be interested myself to hear Central Asian opinions on greater powers from the scholars from Central Asia themselves. But because there is no other way, I have to say some words, probably about my own opinion how Central Asia sees itself in contemporary international relations in Asia and in Eurasia. We should be, I think, discussing Eurasian idea, we should begin from history a little bit, because history plays a great role in this in this region, which is the center of several great historical civilizations. The idea of Eurasia, well, the term Eurasia appeared in the 19th century, as far as I know. But, of course, the current political meaning of Eurasia comes from various, sometimes weird geopolitical theories, which were founded by people like Mackinder and Speakman, but contemporary ideas, and some very popular ideas in some Central Asian countries are those of Brzezinski and Kissinger, who were actually, well, quoting these people and were in a way continuing this general tradition of seeing Eurasia as a key part of the world. We know this famous words of these founders of geopolitical theories, that control of Eurasia or over Eurasia is a key to world politics, for controlling the world. In this American thought, late American thought, as I said, Kissinger and Brzezinski were the most important representatives. This concept evolved into the principle of American policy, the idea that the control of Eurasia should not be allowed to anybody else than the United States. They wrote about it quite openly in several books. For example, Brzezinski, in his Great Game book, which is quite popular in some Central Asian countries, as far as I know, wrote something like that the main gain for the United States, coming from the collapse of the Soviet Union, is the fact that now Russia is not controlling Central Asia, and we should not allow Russia or an alliance between Russia or China to control it again, because it would be very dangerous for the United States interests in Europe and in Eurasia. Kissinger even thought that neither Russia nor Germany, despite the fact that Germany was an ally of the United States, should be given too much power and influence in Eurasia, including Europe, because and that a good idea would be to divide the divide and rule principle in this area. So I'm going to say a little bit later about how this influenced the current views and general policy in Central Asia. Well, more recently, well, another interesting trend was also Russian Eurasianism, which is quite popular in some Central Asian countries as well. For example, well, we have a representative of one Kazakhstan university, but in Kazakhstan they have a university named after Lev Gumilev, Gumilev University. Gumilev was, can be called the last Russian Eurasianist of the classical type. And the Russian Eurasianist theory was coined actually by immigrants. He was an exception because he was left. He did not leave the Soviet Union, and he paid for that. He was jailed and spent, I think, more than 10 years in prison, in labor camps. So the main idea of this immigrants from the Soviet Union, this was the part of the immigrant community who wanted to explain and to some extent justify the Soviet power, the Soviet rule, the communist rule in the Soviet Union. And they coined a weird theory that Russians were not really Europeans, and that Russia is a very special civilization, but not because it was a Slavic civilization like 19th century Slavophiles, for example, were arguing, but because it's a Turanic civilization, meaning that it was a mixture of Slavic tendencies with the so-called Turanic people, by whom they meant the steppe people, the people of the great steppe, and which now populate basically Central Asian countries. And they actually thought that this influence of those nomadic peoples on the Russian civilization was positive and not negative, as Europeanists were arguing, and it influenced Russian political structure and Russian economic structure, which was different from those in the West. It's a very questionable theory, but nevertheless, as I said, it was almost forgotten during the Soviet time, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it became quite popular in Russia among those who were arguing that Russian civilization is somehow very peculiar and very special, and Russia is should become a separate center of the world, not part of Europe, but also in some Central Asian countries, because the people there, the local population, liked this idea of the great role of Turanic element in this Eurasian, I would say, in this Eurasian civilization. Now, more recently, we had the idea of Greater Eurasia, which was actually put forward by, it was coined by some Russian scholars, academics, but put forward politically, we can say, by President Putin and the first president of Kazakhstan, Mr. Nazarbayev. I don't know, are you still allowed to speak about Mr. Nazarbayev? Oh, okay. Right. Because, for example, like in China, you are not allowed to speak about Hu Jintao. You can mention him, but you shouldn't kind of stress his achievements too much, because I know about that. So I wanted to clarify this, to be on the safe side. I'm going to Kazakhstan pretty soon, so you know. Right. this idea was based, actually, with a colleague of mine, as an expert on Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example, I can see that when those principles like fighting terrorism, as they say in China, three forces of evil, or three evil forces, yes, the terrorism, extremism, and separatism, were put to the forefront were the main unification idea, I would say. This was popular in Central Asia, but not extreme anti-Westernism. We also see different positions of other countries on this of this form of anti-Westernism. As I would say that in Central Asia they are quite puzzled and are thinking about what to do. In China they generally support Russia because in China they also see Western, as they see from Beijing, Western attempts to surround China by military bases as a threat. But as my Chinese colleague said recently, aptly, I would say, we agree with Russia on our goals, but not on our methods. So, and in India, as I understand, I'm not an expert on India, but India is like more or less neutral. It does not support the attempts of the West to pressure it on what it should do or should not do. But at the same time, you know, things like international conflicts, you don't really like. I mean, it's not in India's interest, as I understand, because you know, it wants to develop in a peaceful situation, normally. So Chinese leadership, the second factor, is also not popular everywhere. Well, I think it's very popular in India, of course. It's a joke, yeah. Yes, but but in Central Asia, there are different opinions on China, of course, but diverse. But basically, the idea that China is some kind of a threat is also quite popular or widespread, at least in some countries.
Kazakhstan.
We are not going to mention them, but to some countries more than, say, in Tajikistan. In Tajikistan is a great friend of China, as I understand. So, and third factor, values, as I said, the idea of UN-based international law, non-interference into other countries' internal affairs, the centrality of the United Nations in the international law, all this is popular, but actions of some countries from that point of view, including your great friend China, of course, are seen as quite questionable in some other great players of Eurasia, I would say. So yes, I'm going to say some last words. So my conclusion is that Eurasia is going to be not that much united as I and some other colleagues thought before. It may be united on the principles of peaceful coexistence, United Nations Charter. This is shared by everyone. But there will be different opinions on the West, how things in international relations should be done, and relations within countries of Eurasia will be also diverse. There's a growing popularity in Central Asia of the ideas of some kind of Central Asian cooperation, regional cooperation. But I remember they were emerging and going several times during my lifetime. There were all kinds of projects of this cooperation of Central Asian countries, but then they were kind of forgotten. I think there was something called Central Asian Community or something like that, but then it merged with something else. So there are different interests in Central Asia between several players, so we don't really know. I would say that the idea of Central Asian integration and the idea and the interests of individual players would kind of coexist for a long time. Generally, Central Asia will find itself in this complicated situation, and there are, as I said, there will be different approaches not only to China. I can compare these approaches like approaches in ASEAN. ASEAN is one organization and representing one region, but there are quite pro-Chinese countries there and quite anti-Chinese at the same time. And there will be different relations with other great powers, such as Russia, for example. I would say like currently CIS or former CIS countries, where we have, for example, as we say, our brotherly countries like Belarus and Ukraine, which have very different approaches to Russia. So some of them are closer and some keeping distance. So that's generally my idea of the future, and I'll stop here. And I would be very interested in listening the real opinions of representatives of Central Asia itself.
Thank you, Professor Alexander, for that masterly presentation. You mentioned about Brzezinski. We also remember that he sent a telegram to President Carter, 24th of December, 1979. Congratulations, we have landed the Soviet Union in their Vietnam. Thank you so much.
This was about Afghanistan.
Yes.
Yes, you're right. Now, we have been instructed to finish by 11:29:59. So we should do our best for that. Over to you, Professor Saltanat.
Thank you very much. At first, I want to appreciate organizers for inviting me. It is a great honor to be the part of this very important event. Thank you, Your Excellencies, participants, dear professors. My speech will be, I think, the logical continuity of the Professor Alexander Lukin's speech. You emphasized about the three evil forces, terrorism, extremism, and separatism. And my topic will be about the religious security as a key factor in relations between Central Asian countries and China. Significant changes now are being made to the established rules in international relations. After the withdrawal of military forces from Afghanistan by the United States and its allies, Central Asian states have also been forced to make changes in their foreign policy since the Taliban established control over the official power of Afghanistan. From this point of view, it is important for the Central Asian states to identify new joint responsibilities for relations. And the purpose of my study is to determine the difficulties and the common interests of the cooperation in the field of religious security between the Central Asian states, and to determine the conclusions useful to Central Asian countries. The Central Asian region is currently facing all challenges on the one hand, and on the other hand, it is becoming a platform for the struggle of influent players. While the Chinese side intends to expand and strengthen its territory of influence, increasing its influence in the region every day in all spheres, the Russian side also intends to restore its influence in the weakening region using new geopolitical games that are developing in the region. We know that the theory of international relations as a scientific direction was formed as a result of the scientific study of the problems of war and peace. However, traditional views on the issue of power, the most driving factor in the issue of war and peace, have completely changed. From this point of view, the concepts of power and equality of forces in international relations can characterize the objects of research. For example, a well-known Kyrgyz diplomat, Kushtarbek Shamshidov, analyzing the China's concept of power, expresses his view that the main goal of official Beijing is to use the region as a shield, as a buffer, against new challenges from outside after the full formation of economic and political influence in the region. And China maintaining security and stability in the Central Asian region is very important for China. And the stability in the region is essential not only from the point of view of economic interest, but also in order not to disturb the internal peace of the state. The presence of Muslim peoples in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, the unsolved opposition to the central government, the establishment of the Islamic State of Afghanistan too close to the territory of its influence, in terms of historical, ethnic, and mainly religious views, are a real new challenge for the official Beijing, for China. And the Chinese leaders intend to use the Central Asian region, I repeat, as a shield, so that religious extremism and the radical movements do not enter the territory of China. This is one of the main goals in the field of religious security, both in bilateral relations and the multilateral relations within the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This position has advantages and disadvantages for Central Asian states. And the fact that the Republic of Kazakhstan reflects its foreign policy with multi-vector equality positions between forces indicates that it is opposed to a clear dominance of one player in the balance and support the balance of power in the Central Asian region. Influent players who is very attentive to Central Asian region, China, has many plans and interests. It can be said that China does not have a clear strategy for Central Asian region approved by documents at the state level. But this does not mean that Central Asian region is not important for China. In its foreign policy statements, China divides the level of diplomacy into three groups: superpowers, neighboring states, and the developing states. And the Central Asian states belong firstly to the category of neighboring states, and secondly to the category of developing states. And in general, Chinese diplomacy is characterized by a tendency to change, which is not fully understood by the outside world, which is never fully clearly defined, which can be interpreted in the different ways where necessary. Although the foreign policy does not reflect specific positions on Central Asia, China's intensive projects in the political, economic, social, cultural spheres in the region demonstrate the importance of the region for China. Of course, China's influence in the region cannot be considered in just this study in a comprehensive manner, and it is not my goal of study. The main purpose of the study is to analyze China's relations with Central Asian countries in the fields of security, including the religious aspect at the level of bilateral and multilateral relations. And the weakest And China began to interfere in security issues in Central Asia, but today its actions are reaching a qualitatively new level. Until now in Afghanistan, Chinese intelligence services have been engaged in preventing local threats from crossing into China. Using Chinese investment, Tajikistan has strengthened its border posts with Afghanistan. Pakistan has strengthened its border troops to the Gilgit and Baltistan region, and the Afghan army is building a base near the entrance to the Wakhan corridor, which connects China with Afghanistan. And China even had their own anti-terrorist bases in Tajikistan, and according to rumors in Afghanistan, all these cannot be called aggressive military expansion of China in the region. On the contrary, such actions of Peking or Beijing are aimed at preventing and the spread of Afghan problems and the threats of three evils across the border to neighboring countries, including China. The Central Asian states clearly understand that they should use all political methods to solve, regulate, and prevent new challenges. The intensive cooperation of the 5 Central Asian states in the field of mutual security is important, and both the region's own experts and international experts express different opinions about it. Security cooperation between Central Asia and Russia is also being considered in detail. At the same time, of course, the activity of Russian scientists and experts is very high. In the activity explained by the fact that the main goal is to increase Russian influence in the region. In the article, Radical Islam in Uzbekistan, Stages of Formation and Prospects for Development, academic Zurab Todwa, his independent expert in Central Asia and the Caucasus among Russian researchers, wrote, "For religious extremists, Uzbekistan is the most important priority in the region. If Islamists could establish control over the country, how would they get the foundation on which to build the Islamic Caliphate of their dreams?" Said Todwa. We can completely agree with the author's opinion. There is no doubt that Uzbekistan is the country closest to the greatest threat in the field of religious security in the region. In this state, the most numerous radical organizations in the region are registered. Therefore, at a time when the security issue of the region is raised, the rest of states of the region should also understand that the immediate threat to Uzbekistan will be on their territory in a short time and take concrete measures. And also, in the research work, Regionalization of Central Asia Strategy for Kazakhstan, published with the support of Ebert Foundation, in the first part of this work, of this research, which was written jointly by Korabayev and Moldashov, the authors note that the regional integration is in a complete crisis in Central Asia, and the integration process in the region cannot come out of the crisis without Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, or the two countries taking responsibility together and starting the integration process with concrete steps, as well as without other states of the region accepting the priority of these two Central Asian countries. And the authors say that the process of regionalization continues, whether regional integration takes place. According to the authors, if integration is an artificial phenomenon, the regionalization is a natural phenomenon. Their conclusions about the phenomenon of regionalization are clear that if Central Asia is a recognized natural region, the problems of common interests and the collective protection and solving the difficulties and opportunities of cooperation will be characterized by the new approaches. And concluding, to sum up all saying above, the issue of the religious security is very important for Central Asian region, for the states of the region and for the people who are living here. And all internal and external participants are interested in ensuring security and maintaining stability in the Central Asian region. However, each side wants to develop cooperation in the field of security in its own interests and will take concrete steps to do so. It is important to note that the countries of the region should use external factors, also Chinese factor, rationally. In other words, judging by the only one-sided approach to the problem, the increase of Chinese influence in the region, the fear of hidden Chinese expansion and limiting its capabilities and the new views that China is a historical neighbor of Central Asia, its presence in the region is a natural phenomenon. The plans developed for the security of the region have useful points for both sides and very important. Even using Central Asian region as a shield, as a buffer, it is clear that it will take certain political steps and generate economic losses for China. In this case, the states of the region must first find ways to rationally use the Chinese power to ensure the security of the region, forming a collective whole. And in this sense, the states of the region should establish close cooperation. Professor Alexander Lukin said about this, that he saw in his lifetime some organization cooperations of Central Asian region. And the Central Asian region must establish close cooperation, both in multilateral relations and this is because the region does not have collective immunity or it's very weak. That is, the integration process in the region is completely very slow. Of course, the current situation can speed the integration process of the region, but this process still requires a certain amount of time. And the cooperation in the field of security is an urgent issue. Therefore, within the framework of multilateral cooperation, with the greater acceleration of integration in the region, or the states of the region should continue the deepened ties in the field of security. Despite the fact that integration in the region is very slow, the integration process is developing within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with participating, of course, of China. One disadvantage is that the states of the region go to the integration only under the guidance of external participants within the framework of Central Asia plus one, Central Asia plus China, Central Asia plus Turkey, Central Asia plus Russia, Central Asia plus the USA, however, it is necessary to fully understand that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the most rational platform for protecting the collective interests of the region. And within the framework of the work of this organization, the security sphere is multilateral relations should be raised to the level of urgent issues on the agenda. In conclusion, the issues of collective unity of the region in the field of security, including in the field of religious security, has very great importance. The Central Asian states clearly understand that they should use all political methods to self-regulate and prevent new challenges. And the most basic next step, which is urgent for the region, is that the 5 Central Asian states of the region must create a regional organization without any external participants. Maybe it will be organization of Central Asian countries. Maybe it will be organization of Central Asian states. So this topic will be continued, and we will see the results. And also, in my conclusion, I want to say that this topic, Central Asia, and this topic is very important nowadays. Very soon, on 15th of May, at Al-Farabi Kazakh National University in Kazakhstan, will be opened a think tank. The think tank project will be devoted to the investigation, to making research about the Central Asia. And the experience of your organization, International Central Asian Organization, will be, I think, very valuable for this think tank. And maybe we will have MOU between your organization and the new think tank at Al-Farabi Kazakh National University. And we have new horizons of contacts. Also, at Al-Farabi Kazakh National University, we have the project ROL, which translates road. The ideas after Zhikenov Duman, he is the Dean of the International Relations Faculty, now starts this new beginning. And The first interview is coming out on YouTube channel, and in future we hope that we'll have in this channel Central Asia plus India your interview with Professor Nirmala Joshi and other experts on Central Asia. Your Excellency also emphasized in your speech about the corridor north and south. And nowadays we have scientific project about the transport potential of Kazakhstan in the conditions of formation alternative transport corridors, but it investigates the road from east to west. But now we see, after the sanctions, according to Russia, that the alternative way from north to south is very important. So maybe in future we have also will have some joint projects about this corridor, north and south. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, I hope that time regulations, I follow time regulations.
Thank you so much, Professor Saltanat. Starting from China's perception and motivations and intentions, you have covered, almost all the important questions. And we have exceedingly high expectations from the think tank, but we have no doubt that our high expectations shall be exceeded. Now, we are going to request Mr. Dipanjan Roy Chowdhury, but before that, I want to raise a question. We were supposed to start at 10 o'clock and finish at 11:30. I don't know whether we started at 10 o'clock, but we still have to finish at 11:30?
Chair has the discretion.
Anyway, I think we should leave it to, Mr. Chowdhury, who has sort of...
I think maybe if Professor Pant was there, then it would have got extended. I mean, but so I'm still a discussion for this panel, and I don't want to, give certain or my ideas for this, but I have benefited from my interactions with a couple of people in this room, and that includes Ambassador Bisaria here over the years since he was in JS Eurasia from 2009, right? Yes. And he is the one who first introduced the Connect Central Asia policy of the Indian government, and I feel that has been followed through in the last few years while he has traveled to various other capitals, and probably now in the last few years we see a more concrete plan towards Central Asia from the Indian government. And despite COVID, there have been a number of meetings between the foreign ministers of India and Central Asia. There have been regular meetings between the national security advisors of India and Central Asia. And unfortunately, last year, 2022, we could not have the first physical summit between India and the Central Asian leaders, but the Prime Minister definitely held a virtual meeting with all the 5 Central Asian leaders, and the occasion was the Republic Day. But unfortunately, due to COVID situation here, it could not be held physically. And President Tokayev was willing to travel, I believe, despite the situation that he faced in early January in Almaty and some other cities, but he was committed to travel. Why I'm talking a bit on India Central Asia is because the two speakers, Professor Lukin and Professor Saltanat, dealt more with the Russia, Central Asia and Central Asian own equations. I mean, both these speakers brought out the correct perspective when Professor Lukin talked about the U.S. interest in Central Asia, and I have noticed over the years that the U.S. regularly conducts a C+1 dialogue, and recently Secretary of State Blinken had traveled to the region and he hosted some of the foreign ministers. But in terms of concrete assistance, I still find that the U.S. assistance in terms of aid, in terms of projects is still at a very, very low level. They only show interest in certain countries, and that too probably only in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan anyway has a wider outreach to the world, including Kazakh diaspora in USA. And Uzbekistan is the most promising country in the region, particularly after President Mirziyoyev came to power and the way he has opened up the various sectors, particularly the economic sectors. In the past, the US was accused of fomenting civil, I wouldn't say civil war or civil disobedience in Kyrgyzstan, which was controlled by the locals. But there was definitely a period of time when both US and Russia was cooperating in Kyrgyzstan and to the Manas air base. But that was a time when the US was involved in the war against terror, and there were cooperations between Moscow and Washington, including in Uzbekistan when then President Karimov allowed the Americans to travel via Uzbekistan to Afghanistan. But those are the things of the past, and probably in the current situation, I feel that as Professor Lukin would have briefly touched about how US is looking to probably drive a wedge between Moscow and the Central Asian states, trying to take the advantage of the situation. And I feel as Professor Sultanat was also mentioning, the Chinese plan, designs or goals in Central Asia are also no different, but probably designed in a more in a different way. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan shares direct boundary with China, and therefore, of course, has better engagement and Chinese inroads. I understand even the Kazakhstan also has a border with China, right? If I understand correctly. And I believe that the Kazakh Chinese land border has one of the best infrastructure in the world in terms of the customs clearances and the goods that are available on both. At least this was before the COVID. In terms of the attraction that people would have to travel for cross-border movement. Of course, one country which remains enigmatic, and at times to me feel even inward-looking than North Korea is Turkmenistan. And I've heard from friends in Moscow that even Russian speakers always do not, or Russian officials always do not find it comfortable working with the Turkmen or even visiting Turkmenistan for work. But Turkmenistan is a large country with huge natural resources, but definitely very limited people, but still following old methods of entry and exit, and therefore probably we still have limited understanding of the Turkmen society and how it functions. The SCO serves a very good platform for all the countries of the region and to come together, and particularly from the Indian point of view, it gives, I would say SCO is a special purpose vehicle for India to connect to Central Asia. And if I am not wrong, today in Mumbai there is a meeting of the meeting on brainstorming on how to link Chabahar with the INSTC. There has been this talk which is going on for recently, the last couple of months, and how Chabahar could be linked with INSTC with the volume of trade with INSTC increasing, particularly since the war in Ukraine. And if that happens, India is encouraging the Central Asians to increasingly look into this route to have their access to the Indian Ocean region, particularly for Uzbekistan, which is the world's second doubly landlocked country, and therefore feels that it's stuck and is not being able to realize its potential. Uzbekistan had plans of a grand plan of connecting Uzbekistan via Afghanistan to Karachi through Peshawar, but it requires huge investments, and after the change of guard in Kabul, I don't think neither the World Bank or ADB is willing to make an investment of $5 billion at this moment. Therefore, Uzbekistan should look into its own connectivity, which already exists in Afghanistan, in northern Afghanistan, connect it to, from Herat, took it to northern Iran, and therefore, if situation is conducive, connect that to Chabahar and to INSTC. And Kazakhstan already has a railway line which to Turkmenistan, and which is often and has been extended, connected to the Iranian railway to Bandar Abbas. In the past, Iranian oil has been transferred to that, and if my memory serves correct, Iranian oil has also been shown in the world market as Kazakh oil, and so sold. So that route has also been used. And India has been encouraging all the countries to use that for their Indian Ocean access rather than through China-Pakistan economic corridor. The Central Asian states have been very lukewarm to that in any case, but there is always this attraction to use the CPEC, but CPEC itself is in a limbo. Pakistan's economy is in a downward spiral, and even the countries in the Gulf has limited interest in assisting Pakistan or bailing out Pakistan at this moment. What is also emerging, and I found it interesting since the last SCO summit in Samarkand, and that idea has also been pushed by both the Emirates as well as Saudi, more so with the Emirates, is a larger SCO or larger Eurasian and Gulf cooperation. And I would be a little bold and sort of speculate that a larger economic GCC and a Eurasian space is being created, and that should serve the interests of all countries. I mean, if the scholars feel that it should only serve China's purpose, I don't think that would be a right analysis. I mean, all the countries have the space, and today the Russian businesses are largely being carried out through UAE, and UAE has emerged as a big business hub for Russia. And Saudi, the reforms that are taking place in Saudi Arabia in a big way, the Central Asian states, which are secular in nature, would increasingly find comfortable to deal with the states in the Gulf. And there could be also a connectivity between Oman, Iran, and Central Asia. And Oman connects well to India in terms of the physical connectivity. I would say that a larger economic space is getting created between the Arab world, which may extend to Egypt and others in future, but at least for the time being, in terms of Emirates, Iran, Persian Gulf, Emirates, Saudi, and Eurasia. And so we have to watch out for this space in the coming months, and it's expanding at a fast pace. Today, UAE and Saudi Arabia are dialogue partners of the SCO, and they became dialogue partners last year at the Samarkand summit. Turkey has always been invitee to the SCO. Of course, Turkey has its own interests in the Central Asian region and trying to revive old legacy, which may be flawed, may not be flawed. But we have the Turkish elections, presidential elections next month would chart, if President Erdogan is not re-elected, would probably open up new geopolitical possibilities or a new era in Turkish foreign policy, which may not be aggressive, which may not want to claim Turkey's space in Central Asia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dibanjan Roy Chowdhury. You have covered a lot of ground, and you mentioned about the Blinken visit. And we all know that at some point of time, the United States had applied for a certain relationship with SCO, and it didn't work out. It's also interesting that we have spoken so much about SCO, or the...
We are hosting the summit.
Yes, but not only that. I mean,
I'm just,
SCO has its own importance. Now, I'm looking at my good friend. Any questions? Yes. I think we should perhaps, taking into account the time factor, we should have 2 questions now and more questions during a tea. Please.
Good morning, sir. I'm Bhargav Mitra. I'm former Permanent Representative of India to SU Rights in Tashkent and former Joint Secretary Government of India. So my question is to Professor Lukin. In your remarks, you mentioned that Russia's anti-West and anti-European stance, they have some reservations among the Central Asian states. The question is, what are these reservations and why are these reservations? Thank you so much.
I'm not an expert on Central Asia, as such. So maybe it's best to ask the representatives of these countries. But as I understand, well, first of all, they are all former Soviet countries, or former Soviet states. So when they see that a serious crisis, well, let me put it, I need to think how to put it, taking into consideration the recent Russian legislation. When they see a serious crisis in another post-Soviet state, of course, they are not very enthusiastic about it. And secondly, as I said, from a more general perspective, well, as I tried to explain, the basis for Eurasian cooperation put forward by Russia, by the way, by President Putin, in 2015, 2016, was actually, and it was also proclaimed by the Russian leadership all the time, on many occasions, that this policy was not anti-Western. The Eurasian cooperation was not aimed against anybody in the world. It was a value in itself and a goal in itself. And the basis for it were several principles. The common approach to the international situation and the future possibly multipolar world, or the emerging multipolar world. All countries of the region were standing for multipolar world, including China. And the basis, I would say the legal basis for that world should have been the principles of the United Nations Charter, non-interference, territorial integrity, non-interference into other countries' internal affairs. And that was the approach which was positioned in opposition to the approach of the West, especially the United States, which was always, bombing other countries, interfering into their internal affairs, changed borders, like in Kosovo, for example. And from that point of view, all these principles are seen probably in Central Asian countries, as well as in some other countries, as kind of undermined by various events of recent years. So they are kind of not working anymore in the direction of integration. So that's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Alexander, for that detailed response. Professor Nirmala Joshi.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Lukin. You referred to Brzezinski, but later in his writings he talked about geopolitical pluralism. And then there was a reaction from Russian thinkers, Russian geopolitics, who talked that Russia, there is no question of geopolitical pluralism, that there is Volsky, Andrei Amalnik, they all were of that view. I mean, could you please elaborate or say something about it?
Well, frankly speaking, I actually have met Brzezinski on several occasions and studied with his son. Well, we did PhD together at Oxford University. But frankly, I'm not an expert on all his writings because, in a country where you have Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, sometimes you miss something from what Brzezinski wrote. But of course, if you really mention this idea of geopolitical pluralism, that was not what you really meant, because as I understood from most what I wrote from him, his main idea, like of most American thinkers, was how to maintain American hegemony in the world. And that's why he thought that that was the basis of his practical policy when he tried, when he actually continued Kissinger's policy of trying to use China against the Soviet Union. It was under him when the United States actually established diplomatic relations with China. And his idea was quite clearly formulated that a Russian-Chinese alliance or any other alliance, I remember he also wrote about that Russian-Chinese, Iranian probably axis should not be allowed to control Eurasia. This is not pluralism. If you say that other big players should not do something, this has nothing to do with pluralism. It is interesting that this policy is null and void now because, well, frankly, I'm not very keen on Brzezinski's ideas, but now they are, but at least they had some sense from the American point of view. What they are now doing in the United States is they're trying to contain Russia and China simultaneously, which is moving them closer together, which is exactly what he didn't want to do. This policy is quite unreasonable even from the American point of view, but there are reasons, like internal reasons for that, and we understand that. But basically, I don't think that he was a supporter of any real pluralism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Alexander, for that response. Now we are about to conclude, but my distinguished neighbor to the left has asked for a special intervention.
Yes, thank you, Your Excellency. At the end of this panel, I want to give some gifts which I brought from Kazakhstan. Yeah, just a minute. I want to give this gift for you. Dear Professor Nirmala Joshi, we greatly appreciate for conducting this very, I think, important event. And this is a little gift from Kazakhstan, and we hope that our cooperation will be fruitful in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm sure it will, quite.
Yes, I will put here. And also, Your Excellency, I have a little gift also for you for moderating this panel. Thank you so much. This is from Al Farabi Kazakh National University for you.
How kind of you. I just want to make one point, and that is that all the distinguished scholars have spoken scholarly in the sense that they did not represent or try to represent the viewpoints of their respective governments. They spoke as scholars, and that's how it always should be. Now,
Thank you.
we wait for instructions from Dr. Kamala Kumari.
Ambassador Fabian, a small token and a memento for Professor Alexander Lukin from Icaf.
My honor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And one for Professor Saltanat Jakuboyev.
I appreciate it.
And thank you very much. Please, let's break for tea, and we'll cut it short a little bit by 5 minutes, so please be back in 10 minutes so we get ready for the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope you'll come again.
I hope so.
Did I give you my card?
No, I hope so. Thank you so much. I have also my visit card.
Yes.
I will be here.
Yes.
Start the next session, so please everybody take your chairs, and the speakers and the chair, please come into the dais. Thank you. Yeah, let me just get. I'll kick it off. Yeah. Yes, right. So we do it in the middle? No, we'll do it before we start. Okay. Before we kick off this session, we had a minor oversight, and we had a memento for Ambassador Fabian also. I request Ambassador Ajay Bisaria to please do the honors. Ambassador Fabian, could you please come up for your memento? Thank you.
Right here?
Yes. Stage behind, stage behind, stage behind.
On the stage?
Yeah.
Okay. Come right here, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And now I have the pleasure of inviting Ambassador Ajay Bisaria to chair the next session. And Ambassador Ajay Bisaria, the chair is yours. And just as a matter of information, one of the speakers is going to be joining us virtually online from Kyushu University in Tokyo. Thank you.
So, very good afternoon and welcome to this as part of our extended neighborhood. The US influence in the region also should not be forgotten. There was a time when the US was involved in the color revolution in Kyrgyzstan, recall the tulip revolution of 2005. And fortunately, I think for the world, Central Asia did not become a proxy theater of the Cold War, of a new Cold War, as we've seen in Russia, Ukraine, where we had two former Soviet republics, but also the encroachment of security structures which were seen as Western. So it was as much about borders and territory as about security. So there are multiple issues in the geopolitics that we need to unpack, and we have an excellent panel here today to talk about all these issues. We have, of course, Professor Muzaffar Alimov of the Tajikistan National University. We have Professor Chisako Masua, who will join us online, I believe. She's a fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs and a China expert. And we have, of course, Dr. Devendra Kumar from the Shiv Nadar University, and as a discussant, Dr. Rajkumar Sharma from Delhi University. So we look forward to hearing all these voices. And let me start with you, Professor Alimov. The floor is yours. What I will request as part of time management is that each of the speakers speaks for about 10 minutes so that we get a chance for some interaction at the end. The floor is yours.
Slide, please. First of all, I would like to thank Icaf. First of all, Madam Nirmala Joshi for invitation in such very important and very I would like, first of all, to present my last book about migration, mobility, and brain drain from Central Asia countries and Russia. Published it was in December this year, last year, and I would be present this book to Professor Nirmala Joshi. This very thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Olimov. I'm sure it would be interesting
I hope. Yes.
to know more about migration.
Yes, it's a very sensitive, very important issue for our cause, for our Central Asia countries. That's why I think this book will be very interesting for experts. Icaf, experts from India, and I hope we have some experience India in these issues connected with. My presentation, border conflict in Central Asia, causes and prospects. As this issue very sensitive and very for among of Central Asia countries, that's why preliminary I would like to say you about that time for presentation. Very few, around 10 minutes. It's a very limit for me. That's why I would be ask you that all things about this problem. I demonstrated with some slides. It is very sensitive. It's very important. That's why I ask you. I remembered you. I am historian. I am independent researcher, and except them, I am working as National University as professor. But we conducted all our surveys. We supported international organization, including this project problem connected with Tajik border. We supported UNDP, United Nations Development Program, and this project was joint project with our colleague from Kyrgyzstan. That's why it is not proofly official position government, because I am not politician, I am not diplomat, I am not official. That's why I think you accepted these some details. This very, for me, it's very important. Except them, I am from Fergana Valley. I am Tajik part of Fergana Valley. That's why this project for me very important. First of all, I would like content my presentation. If time very few, that's why I only demonstrated some slides. First of all, this review for border conflict in its history on the Fergana Valley. You know that if you look from the outside, for example, for India, the countries of Central Asia make up a single region. From a former point of view, the division of Central Asia into separate countries after the collapse of the Soviet Union occurred almost painlessly. But at the same time, there was a bloody war in Tajikistan, inter-ethnic clashes in Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. The consequences were tens of thousands of dead, hundreds of thousands refugees. Despite the severity of the first years of the department, independent, the countries of the region were able to extinguish conflict on their territory or the carry out successful nation building. And yet the conflict remained, and the first of all, this border conflict in Fergana Valley. In my presentation, I will talk about the causes of border conflicts in Central Asia, dynamic of changes, parties of conflict, and the prospect for building. It is known that the initial source of the conflict is the national territorial demarcation in Central Asia in Kazakhstan in 1924. It divided the once unified the Fergana Valley between the Soviet republics. After the collapse of the USSR, nominal borders turned into real ones. In total, it was necessary to formalize in the international legal terms more than 3.5 thousand kilometers of new formed borders. Of the 5 Central Asia republics, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan have completely delimited the land borders. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have not solved the border problems so far. At this moment, about half of 970 kilometers of the Kyrgyz-Tajik border have not been delimited. This map, you know, it's Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan and neighbors of Tajikistan. If you see this map, also shows that how situation each republic, including Tajikistan. Many works are devoted to its study. As a rule, researchers focus on the role of the ethnic factor or in the competition of resources. In recent years, there have works devoted to agrarian reforms, identity, as factors of the border conflict in Central Asia countries. So what is the basis of the disputes of the Kyrgyz-Tajik border? Let us consider the most popular opinion about the causes of Tajik-Kyrgyz border. The first this region, the Isfaral Valley, including the Fergana Valley, one of the very sensitive sector of conflict zone. The struggle for land and water in the conditions of overpopulation and the lack of the resources. In order to the image of the nature of struggle for resources, I will give some data. Some facts of the population density. This is Farah region in Tajikistan, in Batken region. Most conflict between in this region between two regions in two countries. You may, according to slide, the population in 2019. The 2019 in Isfara was 265,000, and in Batken 82,000. And density between two neighbor region, is 25 times higher than in the Kyrgyz part. At the same time, the chronicles of border clashes show that both sides are equally involved in conflicts. And this is despite the fact that the Kyrgyz side does not experience any shortage of land and water resources. The nature of the settlement of the Batken region of Kyrgyzstan is of the interest. Most of the population is concentrated in the new settlements along the border with Tajikistan. Water problem. Both Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are rich in water. They are located in the upper reaches of the great rivers in the Central Asia. There is also a lot of water conflict zones, and conflict unfold around the rivers, channels, and the water distribution. It is around water control. Next problem, conflict in the sources of national building. In the Soviet times, the borders were conditional. The inhabitants of the Isfara Valley had a common territorial identity independent of ethnicity. Soviet Republic of the individual collective farm practiced long-term lease and transfer of the land of each other economic purposes. The results of our surveys showed that all cultural stereotypes that separate settled farmers and the nomads have surfaced in the ideas about the native land. Isfara Tajiks understand their ethnic territory as a set of the development territories, cultivated lands, communal pastures, and infrastructure facilities, irrigation canals. At the same time, they justify the right of these lands, object with written sources, maps, documents of the land of 19th century, 19th and 20th centuries. Some documents on the land ownership of residents of Uruk during the time of the Khakan Khaganate in the 19th century. Another problem, sources of the conflict, the clash of the different approaches to property in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan in the course of market. It is also same document. You may show cultural differences and different direction of the agrarian reforms. Tajikistan culture of settled farmers, state ownership of land, community institutions. Kyrgyzstan culture of nomads, private ownership of land, and that's why, like in Kyrgyzstan, all land in Tajikistan still belong to the state. Agrarian reforms are going with great difficulties and very slowly. Thus, in the regions bordering Kyrgyzstan, collective farms were divided only in 2015. Therefore, the population of the border zones of Tajikistan hopes for state as the supreme owner of the land in territorial conflict with neighbors. Currently, the clash of the different approaches to land ownership has become a key factor in the Tajik-Kyrgyz border conflict. Conclusions. Our research on Tajik-Kyrgyz border has shown that the collapse of the USSR is not over. We continue to live inside this tectonic historical process. The processes of economic and social reconstruction are enormous in importance. Millennium institutions of the communal ownerships and governance are being destroyed in them, and the social order is being eroded. Citizenship, ethnicity, territoriality, and the most important social markets have undergone a profound transformation over the past 3 decades, even in the different ways in separate country parts of the Fergana Valley. Socio-cultural differences between nomads and settled farmers have been revived. Warring identities and the perceptions of the ethnic territory in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have become the basis of border clashes during the establishment of a conditional border line along ethnic lines. Nation building with the dominant ideology of ethno-nationalism has created a chasm between neighboring nations. The border zone has also exposed and sharpened the differences between the part of economic and political reconstruction that Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have chosen. Agrarian reforms are of key importance of these processes. Kyrgyzstan is dominated by private ownership of land and the land market, while Tajikistan is dominated by the state ownership of land and community institutions. Border conflicts have exposed the clash of fundamentally different approaches to property management and state structure. At the same time, an extensive zone of cross-border shade of economy was formed with strong positions of criminals, smugglers, drug dealers. They are opposed by Tajik and Uzbek agricultural communities with their conservatism, a system of negotiations and approvals developed mediation, a culture of consensus and shame. The efforts of states as well as international organizations are aimed at the reducing conflict. More often, they adhere to the strategy of ensuring the infrastructure, transport, and energy independence of the border communities from each other. Bypass road projects are tearing up the independence of the community, separating them of the different sides of the border. As a result, citizens of both countries have less and less contact with each other. Trade has stopped, ties are being torn, distrust is growing, and the wall of misunderstanding and hostility is getting higher. The actions of international organizations in the form of joint fairs, friendship festivals, seminars, sports competitions do not improve the situation. Although Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan reached an agreement to demilitarize a conflict-affected section of the shared border on September 25 last year, the dispute is far from over. A small border conflict in the Isfarari River Valley is a mirror of the turbulent history of Central Asia. In it, one can see conflicts between nomads, settled farmers, and great cities, and cooperation between them. This is both the strength of Central Asia and its weakness. Over the centuries, the peoples of Central Asia have learned to live together and extinguish conflicts. However, an external factor can undermine the stability of the region. It should be remembered, especially now when interest in the region is growing. Now the region is developing large-scale international economic project. The Fergana Valley occupies an important place in them. destabilization of this part of the region with the help of small border conflict can stop the development of the entire region. This conflict can become a tool of manipulation of the geopolitical struggle between global forces. Moreover, in the light of the development of modern technologies, it is not so important what is really happening at the border. It is possible to control public opinion through the media and mind manipulation technologies. So far, the Central Asian countries are successfully coping with the potential threats. Today, there is peace on the Tajik-Kyrgyz border. The working groups of the two countries are repeatedly describing the dividing line of the border. Both countries hope that the delimitation and demarcation of the borders will stop enmity, and the need for economic cooperation will overcome the accumulated grievances. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for that fascinating case study of a source of conflict. You mentioned you have a question?
Professor Alimov? Yes. We are very thankful to you for coming, and I have great pleasure in presenting to you an Icaf book.
Thank you. So, Professor, your very fascinating case study, congratulations on that, because you talked of sources of conflict. It emanated from unsettled borders, from ethno-nationalism, from land, from water issues. But the important lesson, I think, is that it was settled through the principles of bilateralism. There were bilateral conversations, there were working groups, and you settled that issue. So you were fortunate that there was no outside power that was involved. You did not have oil, you did not have a security battle between major powers, there was no NATO involved. And if you make a quick comparison with what is happening in Russia, Ukraine, I think the whole point is that when countries have a conversation, have communication, resolve their issues without global powers getting entangled, there is a greater chance of peace prevailing and conflict being resolved. So thank you for that. And let's now turn online to Professor Chisako Masuo for her comments.
Can I make a presentation?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me for this wonderful symposium. It is very unfortunate that I cannot participate there in person, but I'm still very delighted to make my own presentation today. Well, I am a China scholar and I know so little about Central Asia. So today, in my presentation, I'm mainly going to focus on China's perception on security and how China is going to use technology to tackle with this issue. So I'm going to share my screen here. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So, today, my presentation topic is fighting against internal and external threats simultaneously. China's international police cooperation with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and beyond. So here, at first, I would like to emphasize or point out that China is focusing a lot on the importance of technology. So, last year, in 2022, China founded a new journal, science journal, like this. Its title is Science and Technology Foresight. And in its founding address, it mentioned that China aims to advance the formation of the comprehensive foundation and the core of our national security and development. by developing those technologies. And its main area of focus is space, satellite, aeronautics, deep sea cyber, and semiconductor, and etc. So on the left-hand side, in this picture, in the screen, this is the very first edition of this journal. It featured the space technology, and in the middle, this is the second version. It featured deep sea technology, and on the right-hand side, the third one focused on the semiconductor. So somehow China is trying to combine all those technology all together to make it as a source of its national power. And actually, if you pay attention to the CCP, it's been more and more clear. It's getting more and more clear that the party itself is emphasizing the importance of technological development. So in the a new Politburo, which was announced last year in October, there are 24 members, and people shocked because it only included one economy expert who has only graduated from Xiamen University, which is not considered to be the best university in China. He graduated from the economic department there. But instead, the new Politburo included at least 3 science engineers in either space or military technology field. And last month, the Chinese Communist Party has decided to establish Science and Technology Commission under the Party Central. So to lead the entire development of science and technology of the country. So somehow, it's very clear that their focus is on the technological development. And in this picture, among those efforts, the most advanced technology in China is this surveillance technology. Well, I think probably China had tried to follow the development of Western countries technologically, but probably when it experienced the first SARS pandemic, it started to control the internet, as you may all know. And after 2014 or 15, Xi Jinping administration started to develop this, policing network by inventing the surveillance techniques, surveillance cameras, by connecting the cameras of a domestic society. So this is the most developed field in the eyes of the CCP in terms of technology. And somehow, recently, well, at least starting from last year, Chinese leaders are focusing on police cooperation with developing countries and the SCO participants. The first case I recognized started in its agreement with Solomon Islands, concluded in April last year, and that its draft was leaked in March. So in this, they talked about police cooperation with Solomon. So Solomon can invite Chinese policemen or military personnel to their countries to contribute to the security of that island country. And this bilateral agreement was, of course, concluded in the end. And the next case was it didn't go successful, but the case was between China and Pacific Island countries. It was reported that in April, China proposed this multilateral treaty with those countries, and in the end, they denied it. but the draft was also leaked again, and this actually this treaty came along with a 5-year action plan. So the picture is from the first and second page of those action plans, and it clearly states the police cooperation between China and those island countries. In the very first page, it mentions the two sides would strengthen cooperation of criminal investigation laboratory, and China will provide assistance in laboratory construction used for fingerprints testing, for forensic auto spy drugs, and electronic and digital forensics. So it doesn't really look like diplomatic document. I was personally very surprised when I saw this, and I can understand why those island countries in the end decided to deny it, because it was something very unusual in the diplomatic scenes. If not, you have a very close relationship with the counterparts, like alliance. So, but somehow Chinese side continued this type of efforts later on. So in the SCO meeting last year, here I put up the Chinese text because somehow English text and Chinese and Russian text are different, even though it should be from the same declaration. And if you read Chinese and Russian, it states that RATS, the regional anti-terrorist structure, would upgrade the structure itself, and tries to extend different organization in Russia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. The SCO itself has decided to extend this RATS organization, which has very close relationship with the police. And at the heads of states meeting in Samarkand, Xi Jinping proposed to the SCO member countries that China would train 2,000 law enforcement officers in coming 5 years. And as you all know, I think you know much better than I, SCO is expanding toward Middle East, by I think sucking up a lot of Kika countries. Nowadays, the official membership, Iran and Belarus have applied for the official membership, and SCO has also received a lot of application to become the dialogue partners applied by many Middle East countries. So it's clear that the SCO is developing toward that direction. And Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia in December last year, well, there he talked. He of course talked with Saudi Arabian leaders, but during his visit, he also participated two multilateral meetings. And in all of those, he mentioned about this, technological cooperation. And in the last one, during this China-Arab summit, Xi Jinping again proposed to train 1,500 law enforcement officers for those countries. And there he also referred that he is willing to provide smart police equipment to those countries. And then, I didn't create another page, but in February this year, when China released this Global Security Initiative white paper, it also mentioned that China is willing to train 5,000 law enforcement officers for developing countries in coming 5 years. So clearly, starting from last year, China is putting so much focus on the police cooperation. And I have thought of why. In order to decipher why, I think it's very important to understand China's threat perceptions. Of course, based on this Western IR realism of the Western IR, threats are the most important source that can mobilize people. But Western IR usually think about understands threat as something foreign. So foreign powers can be a threat to my country. That's the common understanding. However, Chinese understanding, or probably Russian as well, are a little bit different. They understand that threats can be, can come from two sides. Of course, the foreign countries can be a threat to them, and recently they understand the Western countries are the threat to theirs. However, at the same time, they also think that the domestic people who are unsatisfied with the communist regime can be the threat for the regime. So they are pretty much afraid that those two kinds of threats collide together to overthrow China and Communist Party. So they are always, they always have very strong vigilance for peaceful change made by the Western powers, or color revolution, again made by those. So that's why for them, the internet controls and surveillance camera networks are very important and effective in preventing those fears. So I think, so I think that also explains why China is focused on the technology. You know, I think in the end, a new type of Cold War has already broken out in the brain of Chinese leaders. So that's why they're trying to govern their country in a thorough way by using those very advanced police technology. While doing this, CCP's sense of historical mission is very strong. They believe that in this capitalist world, those Western powers are doing whatever they want to do to expand their and maintain their power. But they tend to believe in the next generation of history. That's when China can make the world so peaceful by creating their, by dominating the world and establish peace in their definition. So they think they want to use, this type of science and technology for their mission, and that's why Xi Jinping is putting so much energy to develop it. And because of that, the CCP is also willing to share this type of technology with the developing countries. But I think in the end, this type of way of handling things can also drive wedge between the democracy and autocracy, because this type of surveillance technology can be very useful for the autocracies, which China is in some way supporting for maintenance. So I think that's something we are going to see in the next several years or so. And at the same time, just a quick note. I think at this moment we are looking at this surveillance technology, but at the same time, China is trying to China is trying to expand its surveillance power on the global surface as well. So probably those surveillance domestic surveillance technology can be very useful for many developing countries, but I think we also need to think about to which direction Chinese CCP is handling and developing this technology for. Thank you very much. I would like to conclude it here.
Thank you very much, Professor Masuo. Thank you for drawing attention to something that we are often not aware of, China as a global surveillance power, and talking of the training of law enforcement officers, the globalization of this surveillance diplomacy. And in many ways, what you talked about, China's outreach into West Asia, its surveillance technology, and so on, smart police equipment, it's perhaps speaks to China's ambition in its rise to be a global policeman, displacing the United States as the global policeman. So I think that's a very interesting trend that you've brought to the table, and whether that impacts Central Asia in some ways where Chinese influence is very strong is something that will be a matter of great interest. So let me now turn to Dr. Devendra Kumar for your comments.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. And first of all, let me thank Icaf for giving this opportunity to present on China's role in conventional sources of conflicts in Central Asia. And I would also like to underline that I'm not a student of Central Asia, but I'm a student of China's foreign policy and domestic politics. So my presentation will, reflect on conventional sources of in Central Asia and what role China can play basically through Chinese eyes, and my own engagements with Chinese discussions among scholars and official discourses. So first of all, what I would do is uh, to lay out why China will be or is interested in conventional sources of conflict in Central Asia and what is it has done. And within that, when we are talking about China's role in conventional sources, the line between conventional sources of conflict and what is called non-conventional or non-traditional sources of conflict blurs. For example, when we consider the issues of water sharing or territorial disputes, they are the issues which are not just about interstate relations among Central Asian countries, but they are also issues about food security, agriculture, livelihood of people in the region. And therefore, any power which is engaging with Central Asia, it has to somehow involve into it. And then uh, I'll discuss whether China and to what extent China can, play a role of arbiter in Central Asia, which Russia has been playing for a long time in the post-Soviet period. So my broad argument will be that, China's role in taming conventional sources of conflict in Central Asia remains uncertain and also very limited, with frequent aspirations to play greater role. And while its role is also constrained by its own domestic security concerns and also concerns about uh, um, and hesitations to anger Russia, and also managing its own image problem while it engages with Central Asia. So what I'll do is now first I'll talk about why China is interested, and there are more than one reason. So what I do is I'll just lay out where the China's regional strategy in its neighborhood and why, how it wants to engage with in terms of the means it uses as well as objectives. So when we talk about China's objectives in neighborhood in general, whether it is Southeast Asia, South Asia, or Central Asia, we can think about the broad objectives in terms of regional economic integration, with China being at the higher end of value and supply chains, which helps it, for more than one region. And particularly, I'll emphasize that, when there is the people have scholars have spoken about interdependence and its benefits, but when it comes to neighborhood economic integration of neighborhood, China also
I mean, the economic interdependence is also unequal, and that is where China at times has used unequal interdependence for geopolitical reasons. And then another major objective of China is to prevent any other major power from having military presence or alliances or geopolitical influence. So we can see China's foreign policy in all these neighboring regions with this objective being one major goal. Then obviously China's domestic security and economic needs in Xinjiang and other regions. And then another objective is creating multiple access routes to overcome geographical challenges to its rise. So now to achieve these goals, China uses three or four key means. One is obviously regional economic integration I just talked about. Another is using or participating in multilateral institutions. And when it comes to, there are two ways in which China uses or participates in multilateral institutions. One is uh, institutions where it has already, the existing institutions, when it became member or participant, it uses to install any initiative or agenda which is against its interest. And when it comes to Central Asia and its initiation and participation in HCO, it uses it to advance its own agenda. Then China also has recently, come out with certain normative narratives. In 1990s onwards, we saw that China came out basically defensive narratives of peaceful rise or good neighbor policy. But in recent decade, we have seen that China is coming out with so-called proactive narratives of regional, order, whether it is a concept of, new security concept or community of shared futures, or recently, global security initiative, global development initiatives, or very recently, it has come out with something called global civilizational initiatives. Now, these narratives are not new in terms of their content or the institutional or other framework which they provide, but what they tell us is about China's aspiration about what kind of regional order it wants in its neighborhood. And final component is the military or security role, which I'll talk about in detail. Now, when we talk about China's regional strategy in a neighborhood, it might be, there is a lot of debate whether China has a coherent strategic thinking in the neighborhood. But in recent times, that is what I want to argue, that in recent times we see that Chinese analysts and official discourse reflect a certain kind of coherence in what it wants in neighborhood and how it wants to achieve. So one a particular discourse about there's this Chinese phrase called Tungwan, Peiqiang, Xiqiang, and Nanxia, which means that stabilize, seek stability in the east, which is in Asia Pacific, strengthen in the north, which is strengthening ties with Russia, and descend to the south, which means cooperating economically with Africa, South Asia, and Australia, etc., and advance to the west, which is to Central Asia and West Asia. So when we think about look at these debates, not only these official debates around this particular phrase, but also discussions among Chinese scholars on neighborhood, we see that there is an increasing coherence in terms of objectives and means in China's regional strategy. So, okay, so now why would China be interested in conventional sources of conflicts in Central Asia? Now there are also, there are independent regions, and there are regions when China engages with these countries, and consequently, it has to get into these. We engage with these countries to resolve these conflicts. Now, for a long time, China engages more with the world in terms of BRI or other economic and other investment projects. There has been an increasing concern about, political stability along these countries. And one particular reference that recently we have seen that Chinese scholars and some think tanks are flagging is political stability along BRI as one of the major external security risks. And Central Asia being as a very key route along BRI, it is obviously interested or motivated to engage with conventional sources of conflict. There's also ideological reason why China wants to play a major political role in Central Asia, which is that um, to because China has been concerned about color revolutions and its ideological implications for its own political legitimacy of the Communist Party, and uh, and I'll talk about briefly about how it reflects in its approach to the conventional sources of this thing, and then. Political instability in Xinjiang is a major region, obviously, and related issues are radical organizations and radicalization in general in Central Asia, and in consequence, China also engages with these countries in terms of security cooperation, etc., because of radicalization, plus safety of its economic assets and nationals. And then obviously economic regions are there, and then so now, and then major reason is that it doesn't want other extra regional powers, especially US, to play a major role, because it can, in Chinese view, it can, instigate instability and color revolution, etc. And it is obviously impinges on China's security. Now, so how does China approaches what kind of role does China play in the one particular aspect is, through security cooperation in these countries, and particularly the issue of lack of capabilities of these countries to deal with this. So, in terms of security cooperation, China deals in four terms. One is arms deals and military aid, which I'll not talk about in detail, but its arms deals and deals aid has increased rapidly, at least since 2014-15. Then it also engages with capacity building and exchanges with military to military exchange, training, etc., short-term courses, etc. And one particular aim is to, gain access to or build networks with coming leadership of, militaries of these countries. Then joint counter-terror exercises and cooperation is a long-term, engagement that China has been doing, but in recently also it has been, increasing these exercises also. And finally, there's another instrument which is very, it reflects larger trends in China's security and foreign policy, which is that, many of Chinese private security companies are, expanding into these countries. And in Central Asia, we do not have official acknowledgement of the presence of Chinese private security companies, but we have unofficial sources confirming the presence of private security companies in two of the countries, at least Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, both from the local sources, newspapers, and others. And then these private securities companies, I can talk more about with this because I have I've done some research on this earlier. But basically, these private are to help security make security assessment, intelligence collection, as well as to advise the Chinese commercial enterprises how to deal with the problems that in terms of the security of their personnel, etc., and conflict with the local population. And then in recent times, we have also seen that Chinese PAP, which is actually police force, paramilitary force, it has its presence in Tajikistan border, and we have sources that there is a lot of debate. China officially has not acknowledged the presence of PAP in Tajikistan, but we have information, open source information that PAP has established 12 bases along Tajikistan-Afghanistan border. And this is what I want to say is that, private security companies and PAP or paramilitary forces are also one way of engaging with the what China calls capacity building of these countries to deal with this thing. Now, okay.
Can you just
Okay,
conclude?
I'll just conclude. So now, when we see look at these things, it seems that now there are another areas that I'll just quickly highlight. One is water sharing problems. Uh, China has so far avoided getting into investments where it can potentially anger one country or another country. So what till now we have seen that China basically has invested in countries in lower riparian countries to boosting their infrastructure and other capabilities. But there is one particular project which many Chinese scholars have highlighted as a potential model for China to resolve these water or the role it can play as an arbiter. And this project is called Jarafsan River because it's a kind of cooperative engagement with three countries. And another thing is that I wanted to highlight is that what I mean for Russia for a long time in post-Soviet period has played a role of arbiter between these countries. But China has been hesitant to play a role in terms of when it comes to ethnic conflicts or instability in these countries. Obviously, China highlights its adherence to the non-interference principle and territorial sovereignty, integrity, etc. But we have seen that sometimes China does reflects its aspiration to play a role. And in the recent example in 2022, we saw that just after the instability and protest in Kazakhstan, and then after the Ukraine war started, there was some public statement by Russians about territorial sovereignty issues between Kazakhstan and Russia, and Kazakh fears and Xi Jinping's mention of helping or in a sense respecting territorial sovereignty of Kazakhstan is a major statement in terms of reassuring these countries that we are here to uh, be an arbiter or in a sense guarantor of your or supporter of your territorial sovereignty. And another is that China, whether there is Russia is obviously the country which within CSTO plays role in terms of when there is a trouble in Central Asia, they sent these soldiers to stabilize. But there were also, Chinese are hesitant in the sense, but within the RATS agreement, they somehow agreed that, if there is an request from Kazakhstan, they can send security forces within the RATS and SU framework. So with this, I'll just conclude that, China's role is in conventional sources of conflicts is still low. There are aspirations to play major role in terms on it has to get into that, but as of now, we do not see clear-cut ideas of how and what role it can play in this in the region. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Deven Kumar, for a very interesting paper and for talking of the evolving instruments that China is using in Central Asia to control, to have a greater influence on the region. And your specific mention of China wanting to protect its BRI assets. I think that is an important driver of Chinese behavior because it is creating assets. It therefore needs to protect them. We've seen it in Pakistan with the CPEC corridor. China wanted a greater say in security for these assets. So I think you brought a number of very interesting ideas on the table that will be very important for Central Asia and would demonstrate the Chinese behavior or will predict the Chinese behavior in the future. But I think what this panel is also demonstrating by the number of China experts that you're hearing is that the China's influence in Central Asia is growing significantly. Now, this paper talks of the actual, policy not reaching a stage where China has become a major player, but certainly it's on the way. So thank you for that. And let's now turn to our last speaker in this panel, Dr. Rajkumar Sharma. The caveat is that you're the last man standing between lunch and the speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is my third participation in Icaf seminar, and you know what happens every year is that I always come like a T20 batsman because I just have 5-6 balls to face, and I need to bat like that. So my sincere thanks to Nirmala ma'am because she has been my mentor since my PhD days, and her thought process has been guiding my thoughts. So thank you, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. Honorable Chair had highlighted the regional game, right? Great game in Central Asia. So I just want to add a thing that there is no great game until and unless there is a regional game, right? And that regional game in Central Asia plays out in terms of these these threats that were highlighted. So what I'll do is that I'll briefly come out with them and I'll share experiences from South Asia also because threats somewhere or the other in most of the regions remain the same, right? So first one, as was highlighted by Professor Olimov also, was the border dispute, and he basically talked about Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan problem. This issue has been on the boil since last 2 years now, and there have been, in April and May 2021, there were there were a number of deaths that were caused by this dispute. So that has been one of the boiling areas, but the recent media reports do indicate that the President of Kyrgyzstan has said that we are almost there because delimitation has been done and we will be there on the ground. So we are hoping that there is going to be some sort of agreement soon and this resolution potentially take place. So that is one. We also have border disputes in South Asia, by the way, but the issue in South Asia tends to be different because, when you talk about the two major issues between India and Pakistan and India and China, then these are very complex issues. We can't compare the same experiences. So that is one thing. And also with border issues is connected is the problem of border of enclaves in Central Asia. I remember we used to have a problem of enclaves with Bangladesh, but that was sorted out in 2015 between the current government and Bangladesh at that time. So I believe, I'm not an expert on border areas, but I think because it was also a similar problem of enclaves, maybe something could be shared, that this experience could lead to something for the countries in Central Asia in resolving their issues. This could potentially could be one of the ways. India, we have never used borders as a leverage against our neighbors. There are two indicators of that. One, we sorted out issues with Bangladesh. We also had a maritime dispute with Bangladesh, by the way, that also was taken care. And another one is, of course, a Kacha Thivu issue that was there between India and Sri Lanka. Even that was sorted out. So we have always had this feeling of, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, in a sense that, we, for our neighbors, we have always been there, even if it means, to achieve peace, if something is to be done. These are two examples. And third one, of course, is water issue in the region, Central Asia. As I understand it, and what I could gather from Professor Olimov's presentation was that, at the moment, currently the question of access is more important in Central Asia than availability, right? So, but in times to come, it could become a problem in times to come. Now, with Pakistan, we have an Indus Water Treaty, right? So again, the same thing, this treaty was signed in 1960 and it has survived many wars between India and Pakistan. Maybe again, we could look at the treaty and find some ways to learn for the countries in Central Asia. So these are the three issues that are there which directly can lead to conflicts between the countries in Central Asia. But at the same time, if we do a regional scan, there are some issues which have direct impact on their security. For example, Ukraine has already been mentioned in detail, right? Things happening in Ukraine do bring certain concerns about their own sovereignty in Central Asia. The second issue is Xinjiang, as was again highlighted by many experts. The issue of Xinjiang directly security, China in Central Asia, it called means but the leaders need to be, they require the investments from China. This has been with due course time, and the thing in Afghanistan have been taking place, which do not have a very good, influence on Central Asia. Similarly, Indian security is also impacted because of Taliban on one end, and another, it's only Taliban by the all Islamic, which is create problems in Afghanistan. So basically, the law issues creates issues for both and Central Asia, and this is you see recently there have been many meetings between India and the countries in Central Asia. So last point basically is that, when things Eurasia changing very, very rapidly. So if you see India's policy, earlier we were with the permission chair because sir was the main brain behind Connect Central Asia policy. I'm trying to argue that if you see recent developments, some Connect Central Asia policy now becoming Central Asia policy. Because one, if you see, last year we have started a summit with our in Central Asia, and there have been regular of NSAs, and also foreign ministry dialogue was started in 2019, if I'm not wrong. So politically, there was no connectivity, but at least in political institutional mechanism come, which say that at least politically we are collected, and all because of the security thing that is happening. India's policy in Afghanistan is very active. You would recall India was one of the last countries to initiate a contact with them. But it was pragmatic. Why? Because, it is current policy is recognition, dialogue without recognition. Because things are changing in Afghanistan, there is a belief they are going to stay. One is going to stay for a longer time. So it makes sense if you engage them. We have many projects. If somehow Afghanistan can be stabilized, Central Asia and South Asia may someday be connected to each other, right? This is what is happening at the moment. Last point, as I keep saying, is a strong regional cooperation. I know there are problems because if you apply the regional security framework of Barry Buzan, every region has its own share of problems. They are very peculiar. The point is, if Central Asia can have some currents of regional cooperation, what lead them into a greater position, because then you will see beginning of that game, right? Because as was highlighted by Professor Lukin, that until and unless there is regional cooperation, these regional powers will be in a position to exploit the regional. You can from that from ASEAN. We can learn that even from SARC as well.
Thank you. That's certainly T20 speed, T20 coherence also. I think there were many good ideas that you put on the table, including India's approach Central Asia, need for connectivity between Central and South Asia that determines a lot of it. So thank you for that. And I think given time, we perhaps accommodate questions. So the floor is open for a couple of quick questions.
So to Mr. Alimov, my question. How do you think, Mr. Alimov, are any politicians in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan which are interested in continuation of border conflict? Maybe opposition politician. What's your opinion about it?
As I understood, you want to know about opposition.
Are any politicians in Kyrgyzstan, maybe in Tajikistan, who are interested in condition this conflict in the context of the struggle for authority? Which are not interested in this conflict? Maybe among opposition politicians.
Not yet. But
So the question is, are there any politicians who want to continue the war? Is everyone wanting war?
Yes.
In my formation and my analysis as expert for our conflict border conflict between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan mostly depended on political wills of political elites of both countries. Mostly, I mean, Kyrgyz side, because unfortunately, political elite in Kyrgyzstan use this conflict, border conflict, for their political policy. I mean, if you remember, one of the former political figure in Kyrgyzstan, former security secretary, and one of the leader of Kyrgyz political policy, Madumarov, was announced for nowadays political elite of Kyrgyzstan as one of the politicians who working to Tajik interest. That's why it is intrigue between political elites in our Kyrgyz neighbors. That's why I think this conflict will be resolved only in political wills, mostly in Kyrgyz side. In economic point of view, in the trade of view, it is not any problem.
Thank you. Last question, please. Okay. Yes, please. Or to our guest. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My question is to Dr. Devendra Kumar. You mentioned that the Chinese president made a very really powerful statement last year regarding that assertion on that they are here in Central Asia as far as Kazakhstan was concerned, and we are ready to protect your sovereignty and untouchables of your borders. So this is my question is about how do you think what is the red line zone beyond which the China will not go to protect this? As far as this, do you think that was related to the let's say outside power actors that potentially could be destabilize the situation in Kazakhstan? Or that could also relate to the northern neighbor of Kazakhstan, to Russia, because you also mentioned that due to these claims of these among Russian politicians that the that northern parts of Kazakhstan is sort of like this clash that took place throughout last years. So, thank you.
I didn't mean that China will is ready to play a direct role in Kazakhstan, but what I meant was that it was a clear-cut message, in a sense, to both Kazakhstan people and politicians, and maybe to Russia that we and it's a standard Chinese in a sense rhetoric also. But China does reassure, and Xi Jinping's statement within a larger statement, it does, emphasize, China's this adherence to territorial sovereignty question, and also to message to this regarding at that time recent what happened between statements by Russian politicians, and even I think Medvedev also wrote some message on Telegram, later he deleted, and what public furor it created or fear it created in Kazakhstan. But somehow what I read is that it was a message to both Kazakh people that we are here, and to Russians that don't go too much into it. But it doesn't mean that China will play direct role in terms of if Russia does something in Kazakhstan, if it does.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I think we don't really have time for more, so so we will have to end this session. You'll have more time in other sessions. I'm sorry. So just, I don't want to summarize the excellent ideas that have come in on this panel, but just to say that what Professor Olimov said, that Central Asia has its conflicts. There are multiple sources of those conflicts, but Central Asia is better off solving those conflicts on its own with bilateralism. The Chinese activism in Central Asia does not bode well for the health of Central Asia and its conflicts, and this is something that needs to be watched carefully. So thank you very much for this conversation and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Bisaria. Just before we break for lunch, please do the honors of giving out the mementos to some of our speakers out here. So, Professor Olimov, please.
Thank you.
Dr. Devendra Kumar. And Professor Joshi, please, the honors for Ambassador Bisaria.
Thank you. Thank you.
And a big thank you to Professor Masuo for joining us virtually. And when you do come to visit India next, make sure we give you your memento in person. Thank you very much. Lunch is served. Please come back by 2 o'clock for the next session.